I survived some overdoses from opiates in my day. The backstory is it was 2018, right before I went to treatment, or actually it was right before I went to the trap house. Um, but I'm getting high and this other dude's getting high, and it's in March, so we're like watching the NCAA tournament downstairs, and I go upstairs to find him, and this motherfucker is like just slumped like this, like he doesn't even have his head doesn't even have a nod. He's not even nodding. He's just like, and he's purple. And I'm like, what the fuck? And this dude just got out of prison. Like, I don't know. He'd been in a prison before and just like got out recently. And I was like, well, fuck. And because I knew he had shit on him. And I was like, well, do I call 911? And like, well, will I be a snitch if he goes to jail? I was like, what if he goes back to prison? And I was like, what if I go to jail? And I'm like, I'm just gonna let him die. And like just straight up was like, I'm walking the fuck out of here and pretending I didn't find him. And I was just like, and so I like walked around for a couple of minutes. There was no Narcan in the house that I knew of. And I was like, all right. So I called 911, and then I like patted his pockets down to make like to try to feel for shit. And he had a point in his pocket. So I pulled the rig out and tossed it. And he ended up living. The dispatcher that I talked to had no idea what to fucking do. I had never experienced someone overdosing because I was always the motherfucker overdosing, you know what I mean? So I was like, what the fuck is this shit? And so anyway, that's like why I got involved, because I didn't want like nobody to have my experience or like my family's experience, because they seen me overdose. And or like, I didn't want I didn't want people to be like me and be like, oh fuck this dude, I'm out, and just walk out the door. So that's the backstory to it. And so I got out here, and I had seen, who was it? I had seen like the Church of Safe Injection, and then there's a place in Phoenix called It's Shot in the Dark. I had seen their shit on Instagram and I think Facebook, honestly, and was just like, I want to do that. And so I sent emails for 6 months until I got in touch with these people. They started like, they trained me up, got me, to where I could train. And then they just started giving me Narcan to distribute, and then that's how it started. So Narcan is an opioid antagonist. Um, it's been around for decades, and now it's just, for the most part, it's widely accessible. Most people, they don't know where to get it, but it's fairly accessible. If you know what you're doing, if you can use Google, you can get a hold of Narcan pretty easily. But yeah, it's just an opioid antagonist, and what it does is so when we ingest it into someone, it goes into the brain, and we have opioid receptors in our brain, and it kicks the drugs, whatever the person puts in their body, if it's fentanyl or morphine or oxymorphone, whatever, it kicks the opioids off the receptors and attaches to it. And it's able to do that because Narcan has a stronger affinity to the receptors, and so it allows them to breathe again, is what it does. If you have insurance, you might be able to go to the pharmacy. You don't need a prescription, and you might be able to get it relatively cheap. If you don't have insurance, it could run you from like $80 to $120. What I usually do is when people ask me this question all the time, they're like, where can I get Narcan? And I just Google, I'm like, where do you live? And they tell me. And I usually ask for a city. I'm like, harm reduction services near Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's what I do. And I'm like, then I send them, like, here you go. That's what I do. And you can find them at Syringe Exchange, or just, people that are like we do, we do it. We're not a Syringe Exchange, but we do like policy work, and we distribute Narcan. We're mainly policy work, but we distribute Narcan. I just distribute Narcan. And I'm learning more about policy per se now than ever. But you can go to Next. I mean, if you're okay, I would say this because I don't want to deplete Next Distro supply. But if someone was actively using, I would hit up Next Distro for sure. I mail people Narcan sometimes. If they hit me up, I'll just mail it to them. You know what I mean? Like, I give a lot. Most of mine goes out in the streets and stuff like that. But if people hit me up, I'll get it to them. You know what I mean? But a simple Google search of where you live will definitely find you some Narcan. Yeah, I hope this like, the accessibility and the stigma just deteriorate. And it's in schools, it's in colleges, it's on campuses, and like it's slowly getting there. But you know what I mean? But like as we get there, like the situation involving like the drugs and like what they're getting cut with is like worse. You know what I mean? It's getting even worse now. They should be mandatory in a first aid kit. It should be mandatory at every business. And like I try to tell business owners that, I'm like, okay, if you have a bar, right? Like, dude, so I'll tell you this, they were doing Gordon Ramsay's, like his restaurant, and they went and wiped the the toilet with this fucking wipe, and it'll turn blue if there's like cocaine residue on it, and all the fucking bathrooms had cocaine residue on it. And he was like, what the fuck, who does coke on a goddamn Sunday or some shit like that? You know what I mean? And so my point being, like, dude, like a restaurant, like motherfuckers are doing coke, like the cooks and shit like that, most of them, you know. So like if homeboy dies in your bathroom, they're shutting your restaurant down, and then everybody knows you had someone die in your restaurant. You know what I mean? Like, who wants that? But people have this thought that like they're at liability for a lawsuit if they have that, and it's the dumbest shit ever. Like, you're not at liability. It's so crazy. Like owners think that they're enabling them, or their messages that you can get high in my restaurant. You know what I mean? And that's just not it. You're just saying that, like, you acknowledge that people use drugs, and they may use drugs in your space, and that you want to save their life if it happens. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
that's like the thought process behind it is insane. You can't fucking die from touching fentanyl. You can't die. So your skin is immutable, which means like fentanyl, like it's super hard. Like you would have to hold I mean, your goddamn arm would fall off by the time you like enough fentanyl would absorb into your body for you to die. Like your arm would like literally fall off. I mean, so essentially, like within these videos of like these police officers or whoever the fuck it is that are overdosing from accidental fentanyl contact, they're not actually overdosing. They're having an anxiety attack. So they have the opposite symptoms of someone experiencing an opioid overdose. They're like sweating, their heart is racing. You know what I mean? Their pupils are not pinpoint. You know what I mean? So they're so nervous due to like the propaganda that's out here, the misinformation, that like once they get around it, that they have an anxiety attack. You know, and so all the symptoms, if you look at it, it's not what they don't present the symptoms of an opioid overdose. And so like to explain it, so your skin is immutable, right? So like it's really hard to get a substance to penetrate through the skin. And so they have what they call is like a transdermal patch. So I could cover the bilateral palmar surface of my hand right here with like patches, and like I don't know, 30 minutes, I might get 200 micrograms into my system. It takes 1 million micrograms to make 1 gram. So like, I'm not going to do the math, but it's going to take a long fucking time to get a lethal dose of fucking fentanyl through transdermal patch. And then so like, I mean, there's videos out there, like Chad Scabora. I don't know if you know who this guy is. He's a fucking legend. It was like a couple of years ago. He literally like tested fentanyl. I think he was like one of the first people to do it. He tested it, and they like with the strip tested it. He's like holding powder out in his hand like that. Like, you know what I mean? So it can't get through. Like you're not going to die from touching it. You know what else is like breathing it, all that shit. You can be in a room. It can be airborne in a room, and you could be in the room with no PPE on, for like a long time. I think like in 200 minutes, you might get like a couple hundred microgram dose just from being in a room where it's airborne. You know what I mean? So again, it takes 1 million micrograms to get a gram. So, you know, you're not going to die from that. You're not going to die from rendering aid to someone who overdosed on fentanyl. You know, it has to get in your mucous membranes or shoot it. You know what I mean? Like straight to the vein. So it's just a myth. It's fear-based. Like there's so many people out there that are accredited doctors that denounce it, you know. And if you're that fucking scared to like put your mouth to someone, you can literally like put a bandana or a mask on, you know, that we wore during COVID. I've seen people take like styrofoam cups, poke holes in it, and just stick it in their mouth and then breathe through it. You know what I mean? So here's a stat for you: 1 in 3 fatal overdoses have bystander spice. So how many of those people, they either didn't have Narcan, or they're afraid of like being accidentally exposed because of some bullshit video they saw out there. You know what I mean? And like a lot of those videos where those cops have like overdosed, they never released the fucking toxicology report. Never happened. You know what I mean? So it's just like, oh yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, it was fun.